You are 36 years old, earning $52,000 a year. And if you're like a lot of people at that number, you probably tell yourself a story that feels responsible. You pay your rent. You cover your bills. You try not to carry bad debt. You put some money in savings. Maybe you contribute to your 401k. Maybe you even have a spreadsheet, a budgeting app, or a system that helps you feel in control. From the outside, that looks solid. But here is the uncomfortable question. Is your financial life actually improving? Or are you just getting better at managing a number that is not moving fast enough? Because there is a difference between being disciplined and being financially literate. Discipline helps you survive. Financial knowledge changes the trajectory. And if you do not understand that difference by 36, you can spend the next 10 or 15 years doing everything that feels responsible while still falling behind in slow motion. That is the trap. Not obvious failure. Not chaos. Not disaster. Just quiet stagnation. Quiet erosion. Quiet acceptance of a salary that sounds stable but is not building real security. Because the number on your paycheck does not mean what most people think it means. Salary is not wealth. Salary is not leverage. Salary is not freedom. Salary is just cash flow. And cash flow by itself is fragile. If your expenses rise faster than your income, your lifestyle gets tighter. If inflation runs faster than your savings yield, your money loses purchasing power while sitting still. If your retirement contributions stay at the default setting for years, you can mistake automation for strategy. Recent federal data and plan research make that point pretty clear. Inflation has recently been above many plain savings yields. The FDIC's national savings rate remains low, and many workers are still defaulted into retirement contribution rates like 3%, which are common but not necessarily sufficient on their own. That is what, without financial knowledge, usually looks like. Not stupidity, not laziness, just a person following the default settings of the system. Default checking account, default 401k contribution, default investment option, default understanding of what work is worth. And the problem with defaults is that they were designed to process large groups of people efficiently, not to maximize your individual outcome. That matters more than most people realize. Because once you understand money, you stop looking at your salary as a fixed identity and start looking at it as the output of a system with rules, rules about debt, rules about assets, rules about inflation, rules about tax treatment, rules about who gets paid more, rules about which skills move you closer to revenue, risk, and decision-making. And the moment you start seeing those rules, your behavior changes. You stop treating savings as the whole game. You start asking what your cash is for. Emergency fund. Good. Short-term purchases? Fine. But beyond that, idle cash earning very little while prices rise is not a wealth strategy. It is parking. You stop congratulating yourself for making minimum progress on retirement. A 401k match is valuable. Automatic enrollment is useful. Target date funds are common for a reason. In fact, target date funds dominate qualified default investment alternatives in employer plans, and 3% default contribution rates are still common in auto-enrollment plans. But common does not mean optimized for your goals, your timeline, or the retirement you actually want. You stop calling every financed purchase manageable just because the monthly payment fits. That car payment is not just a transportation choice. It is a claim on your future cash flow. Interest rate matters. Term matters. Total cost matters. And in a world where average auto loan rates can still be meaningfully high, especially for used vehicles, "I can afford the payment" is one of the most expensive sentences in personal finance. That is the first shift. Financial knowledge does not just tell you what money is doing. It changes the questions you ask. Not, "Can I afford this?" but, "What is this costing me in flexibility?" Not, "Did I get a raise?" but, "Did my purchasing power actually improve?" Not, "Am I saving?" but, "Am I allocating capital intentionally?" And once that shift happens, the salary conversation changes too. Because here is something people learn late. Your income usually does not grow fastest when you work harder at the same level. It grows fastest when you become more valuable to decisions that matter. That means solving problems tied to revenue, tied to cost, tied to risk, tied to operations, tied to clients, tied to capital allocation, tied to outcomes that executives, owners, and investors can measure. Most people spend years trying to be seen as dependable. Dependable is good. Dependable keeps you employed. But dependable alone does not usually create unusual income growth. Financially informed people eventually understand that compensation is not just about effort. It is about economic relevance. If you save a company money, increase its revenue, reduce its risk, improve its margins, or become difficult to replace inside a critical function, your leverage changes. Not automatically, not fairly, not overnight, but materially. And that is where, with financial knowledge, becomes different. With financial knowledge, you read your job differently. You start asking, what does this company actually optimize for? Where does money come in? Where does it leak out? What does management care about when pressure hits? What metrics move careers here? Which departments are support functions, and which ones are tied directly to outcomes? What skill would make me more useful in higher stakes rooms? That is not greed, that is awareness. And awareness compounds. At 36, that compounding still matters enormously. Because you may not need a dramatic reinvention. You may need a sharper understanding of the machine you already work inside. Maybe you are in operations and need stronger financial fluency. Maybe you are in marketing and need to understand customer acquisition cost, payback period, and margin. This is where salaries separate. Not always because one person is more intelligent. Often because one person learns how the system measures value and starts building toward that measurement deliberately. That person negotiates differently. They know what market value means. They know what replacement cost means. They know what scarce skill means. They know that being underpaid for years and then asking for a correction is not a strategy. They track outcomes. They quantify wins. They speak in results. They understand incentives. They do not wait for an annual review to discover what their work was worth. That is what financial knowledge looks like in practice. Not quotes, not hacks, not motivational language. Better decisions, better positioning, better use of time, better understanding of trade-offs. And that brings us back to the person earning $52,000 at 36. If that person has no financial knowledge, the next few years can look deceptively fine. A small raise, a slightly better title, a new subscription here, nothing dramatic. But not much real progress either. Because if your knowledge does not expand, your options usually do not expand much either. And if your options do not expand, your salary growth tends to depend on company policy, budget cycles, and annual percentages someone else decided were reasonable. That is the slow lane. Again, not failure. Just dependence. Now compare that to someone at the same age who begins learning the financial layer under their life. They understand the difference between a high-interest obligation and a productive asset. They understand taxes well enough to stop making blind decisions. They understand investing well enough to stop confusing account ownership with portfolio strategy. They understand compensation well enough to stop treating every raise as a win. They understand work well enough to move closer to outcomes that matter. That person may still earn $52,000 today. But they no longer think like a $52,000 person trapped inside a fixed ceiling. They think like an operator improving their position. They are upgrading judgment, and judgment changes everything. It changes what jobs you apply for. It changes what skills you study after work. It changes what certifications are worth getting, and which ones are a waste. It changes what debt you eliminate first. It changes how long you stay in a role that has stopped rewarding growth. It changes whether you build a second income stream, negotiate harder, invest more intelligently, or finally learn the financial language that higher-paid rooms already speak. That is the real divide. Not poor versus rich. Not worker versus owner as a slogan. It is the divide between people who only interact with money and people who understand what money is doing. Once you understand that, a salary becomes less emotional. It becomes a signal. A signal about the value you create. A signal about the environment you are in. A signal about what the market knows that you may still need to learn. And that is good news, because signals can be acted on. If you are 36 and earning $52,000, the goal is not to be ashamed of the number. The goal is to stop treating it like a verdict. It is a starting point, a data point, a current condition, not a destiny. Your financial life improves when you stop asking, "How do I stretch this salary?" and start asking, How do I increase my economic value, protect my cash flow, own more assets, and make fewer expensive mistakes? That is a completely different life. Same age, same economy, same general world, different understanding. And understanding has returns. It helps you avoid bad debt. It helps you evaluate opportunity. It helps you invest with more intention. It helps you negotiate from evidence instead of emotion. It helps you see when a job is teaching you something valuable and when it is just consuming your time. Most people do not need more financial content. They need financial clarity. They need the language. They need to understand what interest does, what inflation does, what taxes do, what default settings do, what compounding does, what leverage does, and what skills tend to command higher pay, because they affect outcomes, not just activity. That is when the salary starts to change, not always immediately, but directionally, reliably, mechanically. Because once you understand the system better, you stop volunteering to lose inside it. And that is what with financial knowledge really means. Not that you become a millionaire because you watched a few videos. Not that every informed person ends up wealthy. Not that effort stops mattering. It means you stop moving through your earning years blind. You start making decisions with context. You start seeing trade-offs earlier. You start recognizing when comfort is costing you growth. You start building a life where your paycheck is not the only thing holding the structure up. That is the fix. Not just earning more, understanding more. Because your salary was never just a number. It was always a reflection of what you knew, what you could do, what you could negotiate, what you could avoid, and how well you understood the system pricing your time. And if that system has been setting your ceiling for years, then the next move is not frustration, it is education. Deliberate, applied, useful education. The kind that changes behavior. The kind that changes positioning. The kind that turns salary from something you endure into something you can actually influence. That is where the curve begins to change. And if it changes at 36, that is still early enough to matter a lot. Because the game is not over, but the clock is real. And the longer you stay financially disciplined without becoming financially literate, the more expensive that gap becomes. Learn the rules, learn the language, learn what your salary is really telling you. Then move.